Councilmember Mylum?
Here.
Councilmember Burnt? Here. Councilmember Little Roberts?
Here.
Councilmember Cavanagh?
Here.
Councilmember Borton?
Here. Item number 2, adoption of the agenda.
Mr. President,
Mr. Cavanagh.
I move we adopt the agenda as presented.
Second.
Moved and seconded to adopt the agenda as published. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Item 3, the consent agenda.
Mr. President,
Mr. Cavanagh.
I move we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda. Any discussion? Seeing none, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. Councilmember Mylum?
Aye.
Councilmember Burnt?
Aye.
Councilmember Little Roberts?
Aye.
Councilmember Cavanagh? Councilmember Borton?
Aye. Thank you. Number 4, that there were no items moved from the consent agenda. Breezing through this agenda with torrid pace. Item number 5, community items presentations. We've got our 2019 Meridian Dairy Board presentation. If Hans
They're in the lobby.
is in the lobby, we'll give him a wave. Way too quick.
These were,
You found it?
there was something as it was.
That's cool.
We went way too quick, Jerry. Yeah.
That's our city motto.
I'm going to slow down and circle back to number 5. But we appreciate everyone being here. So it's the 2019 update. Hans, the floor is yours. Provide the Dairy Days recap.
Sure.
Thanks for coming. Jerry,
I'm
appreciate
Hans
it.
Bruin, President of the Dairy Board.
Jerry Madison, Secretary Treasurer.
Mike McGurdy, Dairy Board member.
They're piling up behind you.
Gary Johnson, Vice President, Dairy Board.
Terry Christopherson, Meridian Dairy Days Parade.
Good. Thank you all for being here.
Yeah, and we're, I think you were asking for a recap or so. It was, I mean, we're just survived the West Idaho Fair, so I haven't switched over to anything else
A
yet.
little busy for sure.
And I think, and I can just give a quick recap, we had great dairy days, the weather was great. This was the first time we moved the parade to Saturday, and from
Difference.
what we could tell from everybody, they seemed to be happy. We were looking maybe next year, maybe we got a dairy cattle show, it was on Saturday morning, we may have to move that to Friday. A lot of parents didn't seem to mind too much if we move it, because it was kind of a close, by the time they got done and the parade was starting to line up. I don't know if you got anything. Terry, you were the kind in charge of the parade. I will throw her under the bus. And
Go ahead and come on forward to the,
yeah, that's the big one.
I think a couple of things that we wanted to address with the council was we were in here for a budget for your help, and of course we appreciate and love that you do that for us. But we had a couple of things that happened. Our police and our fire crew said that our parade, perimeter, and so forth was really well taken care of this year. At the last minute, we found, and this is really truly what happened. At the last minute, we found out the Kiwanis, who usually volunteers as our backup on the side streets where we don't have perimeter set up, we're not going to be able to help us this year. So, and it doesn't look like they're going to be able to help us much from now on. They don't have the staff or the volunteers. So we had to, at the last minute, grab temp help to help with those streets. Another part of the issue that arose when we were in our last meeting before the parade was, and figuring out what we were going to do for the side streets, Stacy from the police department, I should call him by sergeant or whatever, but excuse me, informed us that because we're on Saturday and we're not on Friday, which is a crossover day for manpower, we were not gonna have the same manpower from the police department available to help us with that parade. So, that, once again, we might wanna think about that, and we'll talk to Stacy about it this year with the schedule. Because they're gonna need, he didn't have anyone. They were all already on vacation or whatever, so he couldn't put anybody there. So we'll be asking him, and he probably will have to come to you about that, for extra people, or to at least go back up to the standard that we were at when we were on Friday. So I think I'm gonna have our secretary, treasurer, talk to you a little bit about the budget that we had and the budget that we need to look at for next year, and maybe even some extra for this year, I'm not sure. But one of the things is that the city of Meridian will get a bill from Specialty Construction, which they always do. And the bid that they put out was, included 300 cones to help with traffic, to help with keeping the crowd abated. They only gave us 50, so don't pay for those other 250, by the way. I don't know, who do we address that to? You can maybe let me know if I need to call someone. But we did hear back from the police and from the fire department that where the 50 barricades were for the people that were watching the parade, that did, believe it or not, keep the crowd back. We were using cones and caution tape. And it doesn't sound like it would keep anybody back, but it did. So we were going to do it the full 2 miles down Main Street, but because we didn't have the candlesticks, we couldn't do it all the way. So anyway, had a wonderful time. We had a great response from this wonderful community, and we are glad we changed it to Saturday, I think. So.
I'll just address a couple of things. The kind of dovetail on what she was talking about. The police saying, well, it's a Saturday, we don't have the same number of people working as we do on Friday. So we don't have enough coverage to do everything we've done in the past. And my response was, we've come to every meeting that we've had for months before this. Can't you make an adjustment to your schedule? So I just passed it. It didn't make sense to me if you knew months in advance that the parade's on Saturday, why you didn't plan for that. So that's one point. The other one, since the Kiwanis backed out, and we needed to get people on these side streets to keep traffic back, we hired MAV Event Services to supply manpower. And they provided 25 people to keep people off the streets or stop cars from coming through, and 1 supervisor. So there's 26 people that they employed, and gave us a bill of $1,315 to do that, which we've done and we have paid. I don't know if this is the place to get into this or not, but I'll mention it anyway. I'm somewhat confused as who makes the decision of what is adequate protection. Does the police do it? Does Specialty Construction do it? Does ACHD do it? Who makes the plan that says this is what we need? Last year or 2 years ago, I know the council said, well, Specialty Construction draws up the plan, and that's good with us. So evidently there's no one at the city that's really looking at detail and saying that's good or not. Or is it supposed to be ACHD? Or, I mean, we all want it to be safe. I mean, that's the bottom line, but who makes that determination of how much is enough? So, so when we talk about budget next year, the city's always been very willing to, pay for the crowd control and traffic control, as well as the police and parks department and all that. But if we need to hire some more people to come in and control the traffic, we need to add that to that figure. Using MAV, the people there was cheaper than special constructions people. So, just FYI. So that's what happened this year, so put that in the back of your minds for next year when we talk about Dairy Days is, number one, who comes up with the plan that the city and the ACHD and we and everybody is satisfied with?
Jerry, is there, I apologize for not knowing, if there is a fall or winter meeting, a planning meeting for the next year, that, is there city staff at that meeting, whether from police or?
Yeah, typically what we've done in the past, certainly after the event around this time, we kind of weren't sure what this meeting was. We thought maybe it was that. It's with staff. You know, the fire department, police department, building department, everybody's there, and we talk about what went good, what went bad, you know, the kind of the recap type of a thing. And then again, we meet again several months prior to the event with the staff again, so.
Is there anybody that attends that meeting or should attend that meeting on behalf of the city that doesn't, that you think, hey, it would be nice to have X at the table to try and resolve some of these unanswered questions?
We have fire, police, we have
Mr. President, I can probably help answer that question. So we have a special events team with the city that meets with all large-scale events, such as Dairy Days, and is made up of both staff from the legal department, planning, the building department, the clerk's office, police, and fire. So all of the necessary disciplines are at the table. ACHD also does attend that as well. So they do have a lot of this discussion. And of course, with the change to Saturday, we knew there were going to probably be some changes that were unanticipated because the date changed. Some pluses because of traffic control would change slightly because you're not dealing with the Friday afternoons as you were in the past. But knowing what the crowd and what the traffic would be on Saturday was kind of an unknown. So, but to answer the other question that Jerry raised, special construction proposes the safety plan. It is reviewed both by ACHD and the police department for adequacy. So it is reviewed by both our city as well as ACHD as to what they feel is appropriate to maintain crowd control for safety for that. So it isn't that they simply submit it, but it is actually reviewed by both the sergeant as well as ACHD's person. So.
Thanks, Bill.
Did that take into account volunteers in the past, or?
Yes, in the past.
It seems weird that that's adequate, and, you know, we had to get, 25 more people to control the side streets.
So, yeah, Mr. President, members of the council, I mean, I've attended those meetings for the last number of years. I mean, we have discussed the staffing that's needed for the type of crowd control, and whether it's adults, it's volunteers, how is that going to be done? You know, the preference the city does tend to lean towards is people that do this on a more regular basis, like security companies, rather than volunteer groups like a Kiwanis or Optimus and things, because they're not trained, so they don't really know what they should be doing. So we do normally have those discussions, but I know we've talked about every side street and making sure there's people that are there to keep traffic from trying to get through. And this year was less conflicts with traffic as it was in the past. But I know we've had those discussions on the number of people and how they're done. Now, again, if it's 2 versus 3 or 1 versus 2, I'm not going to say I recall, you know, speaking about every street needs this number of bodies, but we have talked about having people at all of these cross streets, so we don't have, most injuries that occur in parades are people trying to cross through the parade and not realizing it's going on or not caring that it's going on and wanting to get to where they want to go to. So people versus kids, you know, as volunteers are better, adults are better, that people that look like they're in charge or responsible are better. And that's why, again, sometimes we do push a lot harder to try to have folks that are more authoritative in those positions. And so I know we've had those discussions. And again, there's a lot of lessons learned each year on what would work better and what to do differently the next year. So.
That's good context, and it sounds like there's that structure available to address your questions, Jerry, that sooner
Yeah.
rather than later, so there's no surprises on what the requirements might be, who's making those decisions. And
I don't know if we're supposed to do something else if the police department's at the meetings and they know it's Saturday and they know it for 6 months, and then the day before they say, oh, we're not going to have as many people as last year because it's Saturday. To me was, you got to be kidding,
But, Mr. President,
you know?
it sounds like there's a mechanism
So I don't know, yeah, go ahead.
to resolve that and address it at these next meetings. I mean, I can't speak to, you know, what was or wasn't discussed at what time in the past,
Yeah.
but the reason that I asked that initial question was just to ensure that folks are talking early, and if it's a meeting this fall with the individuals Mr. Neri discussed are all in the room, and you make that comment, it sounds like that answer will get fleshed out, so there's improvements that can be addressed for 2020.
And we generally, at all our meetings, we invite Meridian Police and the Parks Department, and most of the time they're there. You know, sometimes they can't make it, but, and I do think, like you mentioned too, that having somebody there, like the MAF, you know, they're wearing uniforms or some kind of a T-shirt is much more effective than somebody with, you know, like a Kiwanis shirt that they say, well, what's your, you know, who do you think you are? Because they mentioned they have a lot of problems keeping them from going into where they're not supposed to be.
They didn't used to be 20 people deep around the whole parade route.
Yeah.
I mean, it has changed. Kiwanis used to be able to pull it off probably.
Right, yeah, and they, you know, they used to have quite a bit more volunteers. I think last year they only came up with 12 people, and
So well
most
done.
of them were related to the person that was
Sure.
trying to get the volunteers, so.
Fair enough.
And I don't want to sound like I'm bad mouthing the police department. They've been great to work with. It was just, it came as a quite surprise to me that the last minute, oh, we're not going to have the people there. We
Well,
didn't.
yeah.
It was like, well, they're got the day off. I said,
It's good you bring it up. If there's a concern or a disconnect, though,
Yeah.
that'd be brought up so it's resolved.
Well, it
It
sounded
doesn't
like
happen
that.
again in
Because
communication.
I don't know, if we mention at the meeting, the police are there and they don't do anything, how do we know they don't do anything? Until it's too late.
Fair point.
Is there one of you is in charge of police, right, I think?
In charge of might be a.
Well, I know there's a liaison, maybe, I don't know who it is that's doing it, but maybe that person could be at the meeting or something.
That's a good suggestion.
Who is that?
Mr. President,
Yes.
I'd like, just, I guess for some clarification and just to really figure out what it is. I mean, you mentioned several things. The police weren't there, and then the volunteers weren't there, so you hired some temps. I think really to get to the biggest concern, you mentioned safety. Did you feel like it was unsafe?
No,
Okay. Did you feel like there needed to be more police presence
yes.
for specifically?
Crowd control.
On the main street.
You mentioned a couple different things there,
Right.
and they're kind of not necessarily the same. The police do a great job. They go up and down the parade route as much as possible. And that's why I guess I started with who approves this, because it was approved with nobody on these side streets physically being there to stop it. Okay? And that's okayed by the city, ACHD, and especially construction. But in fact, there needs to be, at least in our opinion, to make it safe, somebody needs to be there to physically stop someone from moving the barricade and driving through it. Okay, there needs a body to be there.
And then that needs to be a police officer, not
No.
Okay, this is why I'm trying to,
No.
differentiate where
No,
we need actual
they
police
don't need to be
officers
standing there.
versus
No.
these other people that you hired. And you didn't have all the cones.
Right.
And does specialty construction have people there as well?
They had some, I don't know.
As many as what they quoted?
Yeah, yeah. They had what they said they would have.
They
there.
did have what they said they would have.
Yes, as far as bodies, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
So, yeah,
I mean,
it really just sounds like you need to figure out how many people it takes.
right.
And have a commitment from whatever the sources are. This is how many police we need. This is how many other traffic control people we need. And that should just be part of the plan. And maybe it is, I mean, that got approved, but obviously that needs adjusted because it didn't work.
Yeah.
And you didn't have the commitment from the police. But that's why I say come up with a specific number next time with the plan, specific to police that are needed for the patrol on Main Street.
Is that something we should be making the determination of?
I don't know. These are for your
I have
discussions.
no idea how
Kind of
many
goes to,
police-
you know,
yeah.
back to wherever it comes back to your question, which is who makes the plan and who approves
Right.
the plan.
Who says this is
Ultimately, this
adequate?
is your parade, right? So I would guess that you would have a lot to do with what goes into that, and then have it approved by, especially if you're the one that is not happy with the result. So,
I guess I'd be fearful if we had the parade this past year and we didn't bring these people in and something did happen, who's going to get in trouble on this? I think all of us have our liability out there that we put it on, the city approved it, and they said this is adequate, and it doesn't turn out to be adequate. I think we're all liable then. So that's why my original question comes back again. Who makes the final determination? And if the city and ACHD and especially says, you don't need those people, well, we're not going to hire them. Right?
Well, the other thing we had, and we'll be smarter next year. We're always smarter next year. But we had an expectation of a lot of candlestick cones, and then we were going to tie the caution tape to them. We ended up with cones, the pyramid cones, which are impossible to tie anything to. And they actually, and they were in the right spot where the candlesticks should have been, as a pedestrian control device. But it was almost a hindrance because that was now the new boundary that people moved beyond. Instead of before, without them, the sidewalk was the boundary. So now we had this new boundary that was 3 feet farther out into the street that we were trying to push people back. So like I said, we'll be smarter next year. We will expect and require the candlesticks so that we can have the caution tape all the way down both sides of Main Street. And I know there's talk of closing the island down just south of here to spectators next year, which I think will help a lot. So, but I think all in all, it went fairly well. There was a few tense moments there with kids and everything, but anyway, I think it was pretty much a success, and especially going to the Saturday, and appreciate your support.
I appreciate you sharing that.
I'd like to say something. I think one of our biggest concerns with this bill is we kind of went out on a limb on our own. We seen a risk that we didn't like, and we made an adjustment for the risk. And we didn't have necessarily your permission with the funds to back it. So we took a risk on our behalf, thinking we might have to pay for this, but we felt like it was just to make the call to say, hey, we'd rather have it safe and eat the bill than have it unsafe and have something happen. But we just felt like we would like some more clarity in future meetings to say we don't want a free-for-all checkbook from you guys, just to say we can have this thing a fortress, but we need to have some sort of, communications in there to where we don't, spend the city's money, if you guys approve this, that we have some limitations in there that we feel comfortable with, assuming the risk of the parade. So.
Mr. President, sorry, go ahead. So, and something that I was thinking about prior, we approved a not to exceed amount.
Correct.
This is an accounting, finance department issue. This is not something that we can determine up here, for sure. But if we had less police officers present that we allotted some funds for, it seems that there might be some overflow that might be able to go to contribute towards this bill. But in essence, it does the same thing from what was supposed to happen with the money that we were offering in the first place. Does that make sense?
It does, and I don't know how many police officers weren't there versus how much this bill offsets. I don't know that accurate number, but
That's why I said the finance department issue.
Well, I think the reason there were less police officers because on Friday, and I think it has to do how one shift comes in and one shift goes out, and on Friday those two always overlapped. It's from what I understand from the police. But then on Saturday you just had the regular shift on, so there wasn't any extra police like you had on Fridays before. That's kind of my understanding.
Any other unique successes or areas of improvement opportunities that you'd like to be on that fall agenda with the group that Mr. Neri had described that is utilized every year? So things are addressed and answered sooner rather than later.
Do you determine who the liaison person is with police department?
Yes.
Yes.
Is it set for next June?
No.
It'll be set after the elections?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I would maybe suggest that that person
Good idea.
come to the meeting, whoever that happens to be. That wasn't the biggest problem. I mean, you had a few less police, but they did a good job and it was taken care of. To me, the big problem was the extra manpower and did we really need to do that? We thought we did.
Anything else that would be helpful to have on that agenda?
Yeah, if while it's still relatively fresh in all of our minds, if those of you that attended, you'd write down your thoughts of maybe things that we could do better or change and have for us at our get-together that we're going to have with the city staff coming up would be helpful. Even from the little festival in the park to the parade to anything to do with the events at the Speedway, it'd be good, it'd be helpful to us. I know, Bill, you're always at the meeting and if any, I don't know if you'd be the clearinghouse for that, but anyway, if that.
Mr. President, members of council, if you did have any comment, I would direct it to the clerk, because clerk's office manages this agenda and the scheduling of that meeting. So if you want any input to that, we can certainly funnel that through the clerk's office. Nancy Radford is the one that manages that for the special events that go on.
The partnership with the city is pretty important, so I appreciate raising the good stuff, and also if things didn't go as perfectly as they could, let's address it for next year. Council, any other questions?
Mr. President,
Mr. Byrne?
one thing I noticed, there were a lot more people there than past years. I think that moving it to Saturday evening instead of Friday evening made a pretty big difference. I remember being in the parade many times. Usually when Main Street meets Fairview or Cherry Lane, it sort of dies off quite a bit. And there were people packed all the way down Fairview, turned back on, was it 3rd, 2nd, whatever, halfway down that street. So I couldn't believe the amount of people. So I think these are just some talking points that are important to discuss. Hopefully you have jotted down some notes and we get the right people there talking about the right things, because I think that it's important. You're only going to get more people, for it being on
Once they
Saturday.
figure out it's moved to Saturday.
Right. I notice a difference.
Mr. President,
Ms. Smiley?
I have the feeling that they're asking us to help pay for this bill, maybe a little bit indirectly. So I would like to maybe direct finance to do a reconciliation of actual costs, and compare it, once they get we have the bill, it should be less, for less cones from specialty construction. If we had less officers that than we had put into the numbers, and see if there is anything left over, at least that from the money that we committed to put towards this expense that was a safety expense. Is that clear? Does that make sense?
I might, to muddy the water a little bit more if I could. Bill knows, there was an ordinance passed several years ago that we are a historical event.
Yes.
And because of that, the city pays all of the police, fire, parks department budget. That's a given. That's an ordinance. The part above that, which would be cones and that type people, is what we need help paying with. And I think the motion that was passed every year here kind of lumps it all together and says, we want to spend, I remember the figure, $9,000 or whatever it is, 4 dairy days. And they took the salaries out of that. And I always think that's kind of weird way of doing it, since the salaries are a given that they have to be paid for. Why don't we just look at
Estimated.
the crowd control part of it and just make that an item? But that's just my suggestion. But it does,
Yeah, I
it
don't
does
think that
kind
muddies the waters.
huh?
I don't think that muddies the waters necessarily. It provides some clarity to what Ms.
Yeah.
Milam's asking us to look into, and
Yeah.
finance certainly can do that.
All right. I will drop this off if you guys decide you want to pay for it.
Oh, give it to,
Kelly's our treasurer.
Mr. Clerk will take it.
Huh?
Can you tell he's our treasurer?
Council, any other questions?
No, sir.
Again, appreciate you all coming and bringing up the,
Thanks, guys.
Okay.
Thank you
the opportunities.
Appreciate the support.
Okay, thank you. Welcome, Mr. Palmer. Good to see you. Item 6A, there are department commission reports. Public Works Week update to council. Susie's here. I think you're going to kick off the presentation. We saw Dan lurking. Uh-oh. How you doing?
Good.
Good?
Thank you for letting me delay my
Sure.
presentation for a couple of
No
weeks.
worries.
I have a brand-new granddaughter, born.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
What's
Thank
your
you.
name?
Her name is Elowen Grace,
It's a beautiful
and
name.
they'll call her Winnie.
It's a beautiful name.
Start with the pictures.
If you want to see a picture, I have my phone. So, Mr. President, members of the council, it's my pleasure to provide an update to you on the 2019 Public Works Week. Planning for the Public Works Week begins in January by these members of the Public Works Week Planning Committee. Our theme this year was It Starts Here. For Meridian, Public Works Week truly does start here with the support of the mayor and council members and the hard work of this team. Our first event this year was the Poop Scoot. Many staff and members of the public indicated they missed this last year, so we brought it back and moved it to an exciting new location at Clarner Park. As a slight twist this year, our entry fee was either food for the Meridian Food Bank or toiletries for the Boise Rescue Mission. We collected 3 boxes of toiletries for the mission, 77 pounds of food, and $16 for the food bank. It really was a fun event for our participants and staff. For our very popular and one of our most personalized educational events, we focused on making the Go With The Flow facility tour even bigger and better this year by adding a second bus so that we could reach twice as many people in our community. The response from the attendees was again this year overwhelmingly positive. The expo always generates lots of excitement from the littlest visitors to the repeat attendees. We even had one attendee who said they've been here for 10 years. This year was hot, and the fire hydrant display was hugely successful. There was dancing in the streets. From old favorites like all the big trucks to the newest fountain display, to meeting hydro and tootsies to building toolboxes, there were so many opportunities for our community to learn about public works, and they did. The people really enjoyed interacting with our fantastic public works staff. So here's a quick video recap of our Public Works Week events. So all those smiling faces that you saw are the reward we get for sharing these learning opportunities with our community. This isn't possible alone. Our sponsors and other partners help us make this happen. Your support and participation also make it possible. This year, we had one sponsor that really stepped up, and we'd like to acknowledge them with a plaque to express our appreciation for their generosity. At this time, I'd like to invite our representatives from Republic Services to join us so we can thank them. Council President, if you would like to join us, and Dale?
Certainly.
Thank you. I think Genesis is coming.
Genesis is coming, yeah, thank you. You're so little, Susie.
Stick your tongue out tight.
Thanks, you guys.
Thank you. Don't go too far.
You guys, I'm done right now.
Thank you, Rochelle. Each year, we also traditionally take the remainder of the sponsored donations and share them to meet some of the needs in our community. This year, we are pleased to share a total of $2,994.03 to the following. There are 2 internal programs we're pleased to partner with. The Parks Care to Share Community Scholarship Fund, we donate $500 to them to help the children of our community participate in various parks programs. And for the SWAC Community Recycling Fund, we've donated $500 to help with projects and programs that help promote responsible recycling. And now if we could have the Meridian Food Bank representative, Dan Clark, join us. Retired. We have a check for them in the amount of $1,994.03 to help provide food to local charities or local residents in need.
One, two, three, cheese.
Okay, send them all at the same time. Otherwise, they will live in my camera forever.
I'll send mine.
And that's Public Works Week 2019. We want to thank you for your continued support, and we would love to see you next year. Any questions?
Thank you, Susie. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Council, any questions? So,
All right.
yeah, just a couple comments. It just gets better every year. It's so professionally done, and the 2 great outcomes, among others, are that you expose our community to the great work and great people in Public Works, and you kind of let us be proud of all that you do. So we're proud to support you and let the public see all the good work that you do and how you do it, and get a glimpse behind the curtain a little bit. So you make us proud every day. So
Thank you.
well done again this week.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you, Republic
Yes,
Services.
Mr. Kevin.
I just want to add one particular piece. So I think I've been participating with Public Works Week in some fashion or another for almost 10 years. I didn't get to do anything this year because I was out of town. But one of the things I think is important for the council and for those few of us in the public that are here, Mrs. Palmer watching online should know, is that when this event first started, it was largely driven by our staff and supported by our citizens. They came out. But because, Mr. Borton, to your point, because of the level of quality of this event, the business community has turned out year over year. And I think that sponsorship element is so critical to showing that the business community supports the efforts of our Public Works Department. They support the events that our community comes to. And I think that is one of the best parts about Public Works Week is how you continue to attract business to come in and donate their time and energy to keep making this event bigger and
Thank
better.
you.
I support it.
Thank you.
Well said.
Thank you.
Thanks, Susie. Item number 6B, Benefits Trust Agreement Discussion. 6B, this is coming back, if you recall, from 2 weeks ago, 1 week ago, last week.
Last week.
We've seen the document before. Christina's here as well as Mr. Neri if there's any questions, but Mr. Neri, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Mr. President, members of the council, after a discussion last week, there was 3 specific changes that the council had requested. We have made those changes in the document. We did have a discussion with Mr. West and kind of explained what finance's concerns were on how the mechanism of funding occurs and how we had to align that with what the Department of Insurance requires. And I think we're all on board. I did get an email today from Mr. Lavoy, asked a couple of concerns about some of the language, but again, we're trying to match up with a statutory requirement, not to impact the business operations of the city. And he's comfortable that we're going to be able to make that align without a concern. Mr. West, our outside counsel in this case, he met with Ms. Barney and myself last Friday because he was trying to understand where the concerns were. And I think we are aligned with the Department of Insurance's requirements to make this workable. And so we are asking you to approve the agreement and let us move forward with the next phase, which is submit this Department of Insurance for their review.
Thank you, Bill. Do you need action on the bylaws and the agreement?
Mr. President, members of council, just the agreement. So that's the agreement between the city and the trust. The bylaws are merely the operation guide for the trustees. So just the agreement itself.
Okay. Thank you. Council, any questions? Thanks for addressing the questions and concerns of council. Christina, thanks for the work to do that and following up with Mr. West. So, your motion.
Mr. President.
Ms. Little Roberts.
Mr. President, I move that we approve the benefits trust agreement as presented last week with the changes
Today.
for today.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the amended benefits trust agreement. Any discussion?
Mr. President,
So, Mr. Cavanagh.
just want to echo your comments. Appreciate the work of staff to get this agreement all put together. I put a lot of thought into this. As council is well aware of, I've had some significant reservations about there not being a member of the city council as a trustee. I've continued to hear from other elected officials across the state who have voiced similar concern. I don't want to take away the great work that's been done by HR and the legal department. That's just a hurdle that I haven't been able to overcome. So I won't be voting in favor of this. It's not because I don't think that we need to move to a trust. I've been wanting to see something like this for 6 or 7 years. I just think that it's missing a critical component for our taxpayers. And so until that's resolved, it's something I can't be in support of.
So one of the, and I thought of those earlier comments, section 3.1 and 3.2 of the trust reference trustees from 3 to 5. They appoint 4. So it's structured in a way that if approved, it allows for an elected official or any 5th trustee to come on. So the structure of the trust itself doesn't prevent what you're asking for to happen. It just doesn't place an elected official on right now.
Mr. President, if I can respond. Correct. And I spent a lot of time kind of considering that particular piece, but because we were forthright in saying these are the 4 members and leaving a 5th blank, it leaves that as somewhat nebulous. If we had said for a council member to be determined at a later time, or an elected official to be determined at a later point in time, or a member of the public to be determined at a later point in time, that may have helped me come around. But because it was left empty, for all intents and purposes, we're saying is these are the 4.
Mr. President,
Ms. Mylan.
are you, I don't even know what to say. I respect what you're saying a lot, but it comes back to the conversation that we had, that is, there may not always be a council person as we are elected officials and we change over regularly that is willing to take on that responsibility, which is why we didn't want to put it in there as a requirement. Are you asking to be part of this committee? And that, I mean, I would be okay putting that on the next agenda to have you approved as part of that, if that's something that you want to do as the 5th person. For right now, you still have 2 years left of your term. But requiring it to be a council person can set it up for problems down the road.
Mr. President.
Mr. Cavanagh.
Respond. Councilmember Mile, appreciate, these are big questions, not something that I'm concerned. For me, even the 4 current names that are on there are essentially all temporary. At some point, those 4 individuals are going to retire or win the lottery, be recruited away, and so everybody's position as a trustee is somewhat temporary. The question of, is it me who serves in that capacity? If there's nobody else on the council that's remaining that would want to serve, then yes, because I believe so importantly that we need to have a city council member involved. We do all have 2 other council members who have at least 2 years left on their term. I'd be equally supportive of them as well.
Absolutely, me too.
The other part of, and this may go into, again, a deeper conversation, is because the way the agreement is now structured is that the council can dismiss members, that may be more of a challenge to have a council member that is on there as a trustee and also has the authority to dismiss the other members. You know, the body has the opportunity to dismiss them as a whole. Again, it's not a piece that I had considered, in part because I felt like that the council was going to move forward without a council member as a trustee. And I didn't want to slow that process, but I wanted just to articulate that I'm not supportive of it as it's presented, to thank the staff for doing great work to try and get it there. But it wasn't something that I felt comfortable with for the reasons that I previously stated. If the council is of the mind to say, no, we've changed our mind, we do think having a council member involved is important, I think that we may need to look at the agreement again so that we don't create a conflict by having a trustee also have the ability to dismiss other trustees.
I raised I guess to respond, not to open a can of worms. I think it's in its current form. It's appropriate to approve today, and because it preserves that right for a future discussion if a 5th person that might be a council member joins it in the future, though. I think we went through that, hashed it already.
Mr. President, to that point, I'd like to ask maybe Mr. Neri a question. Sure. Mr. Neri, as the agreement is currently drafted, would that be a conflict if next week the council decided to add a council member, or a year from now, 5 years from now, to add a council member as a trustee? Would that create a conflict or any risk as the agreement is currently drafted?
So, Mr. President, members of council, I think the potential is yes. The way it's drafted, I think it could be a conflict for the Department of Insurance. If you recall, Mr. West felt it was already inherently a conflict. Now we're actually making it a conflict. So I think you are going to have an issue with the Department of Insurance. The Department of Insurance has still never answered the question that was posed a few months ago about an elected official serving this capacity. And the best answer we could get from them was, well, at least they could apply, but we would likely deny. So if the requirement is that it has to be a council member and they finally finalize their opinion and it gets denied, does this fail? If it's required by our agreement that it has to have an elected official on it. That would be the concerns. We haven't vetted because I didn't know we would still need to vet that. So I think you were correct, Mr. Cavanagh. We would, where it's currently crafted, it would have to be a new agreement would have to be drafted.
Amended.
Drafted, yeah.
Any other discussion from council?
Yeah, Mr. President.
Smiley.
Okay, so just for clarification, Mr. Neri, if, say, January, when you have the new council members and they have a discussion and decide that they do want to have a council member on the board, not as a requirement, but they have somebody that's is volunteering and willing to do it, at that point, if that person is put on the board, can it be modified? Can the agreement be modified at that time?
Mr. President, council members, yes. If that's the desire of the council is to add that, we could then reevaluate the agreement, look at that, whether or not it needs to be amended as part of that, Again, the Department of Insurance may have a different, response 4 months from now, I don't know. But yes, we certainly could come back and amend the agreement. if
Nothing
needed.
is written in stone.
Correct.
We're just-
But Mr. President, I'm going to make one indulgence, and this is my apologies. When we set this agenda, we set this as a discussion item, as an update from last week, but we do need action. It isn't listed as an action item, and it's required to be. I'd ask if you were to take action tonight to approve it, to move it to your 6 o'clock agenda and add it to that agenda as an action item. So that might give you another 40 minutes to ponder that question.
We'll do that and make note to add it.
That's a great idea.
On the 6 o'clock. So appreciate the discussion and the good work to get us to the stage where we are now. So 6B will go to the 6 o'clock for action. 6C is the review of rules for participatory budgeting. This is, and I'll start the discussion from here if that's okay, not a lengthier, in-depth discussion, but a reminder to all of us of how this program started. It came up in the budget discussions when we approved, I believe, a $20,000 line item to renew participatory budgeting. How is it to be used, and what would be the group or groups that would have funds available to it? And I believe the general question was, MIAC has used it each year. The Senior Advisory Board has utilized it last year with some success, and both, I believe, desire to use it, the process going forward. So what are the bounds, if any, to that? Are there other groups within our community that we want to open this opportunity up to? So it was left at the budget meeting that we would make brief comment about how it started and the specific purpose of it. So the specific purpose of participatory budgeting and why we brought it here was trying to give a voice to a finite segment of our population that was either not being heard or not having their specific issues addressed. If you'll recall, the larger conversation in larger communities most commonly sees it utilized in a particular neighborhood or borough that might not be having specific area concerns addressed. We utilized MIAC, being a youth population which doesn't vote, to try and give them an opportunity to address youth needs that maybe the elected officials aren't addressing. So, and the seniors being the next group. So the unanswered question was, knowing those are the parameters, that you have to have a measurable finite, whether it's geographic or MIAC or the senior, some way to control who's participating in it, and then ensuring that group utilizes the strict rules where the elected officials don't weigh in at all in what they're doing, that it's not for personnel, it's for one-time expenses. We've become familiar with some of those. That if there's a desire by whether the mayor or anyone on council to try and expand it to a third group or a different group, that we talked about it here, and then Jody's not here, but I mentioned it briefly to Jody St. Martin, having her input because she oversees it. One of her comments was, if there's a desire amongst the mayor or council to expand this to a different group, the administration of it that she provides to the two groups now is pretty intense. And so we'd have to be mindful of that there could be a large obligation on city staff to try and shepherd whoever the other group might be through the process, especially for the first time. So that's why it's on today's agenda, just to see if there was anyone who wanted to suggest a new group might be encouraged to utilize participatory budgeting or not use seniors or MIAC.
Mr. President,
Yes.
why does it need to be a specific group and not just open it up to let people bring ideas and not with using any administration until we heard some ideas from the public?
So, Ms. Milam, the origin of the whole thing was, it's a solution to a problem. The problem being that if you have some group in your community that isn't having a specific need addressed. So rather than, it's not designed to, just provide funds to anyone and for any particular reason, to spend it however they wish. For what it's worth, that's just what it's not.
But if
there
it
for.
brings an improvement to our city that may serve a group that is underserved right now, but it's not somebody that we're necessarily thinking of, and it could, yeah, I mean, for us to just sit here and go, who are all the groups, and we don't even know what all the groups that exist, that if we just open it up broadly and let them, like a RFP, let them put in their, show us what they would like to have done, and then, maybe then take the top 2 or 3 and then, really have Jody work with them on that. I don't know, it's just a thought, but I think there are a lot of groups out there that aren't even gonna come to our mind, or areas within the city that maybe we're not thinking of. We don't necessarily have, we have the downtown association. There are a lot of things and a lot of people and a lot of groups out there that aren't at our forefront of our mind. Sorry, I'll leave it at that.
Mr. President,
Mr. Kavanagh.
I think to Councilmember Milam's point, I mean, both the 2 programs that Jody currently works with is because those are programs that are ran out of the mayor's office. So it's natural that, those were the places that we wanted to pilot it. Any deviation likely that we do will break from that tradition, right, of using programs that are housed within the mayor's office. And so, to Councilman Milam's point, I wouldn't know who to say, well, what about, again, the Friends of Meridian Arts or the Downtown Business Association, the Southern Rim Coalition, whomever would want to participate. I'm more supportive of having it being less restrictive to a group as opposed to being exclusive to programs that are just ran out of the mayor's office.
Okay, more akin to a grant program, where any assorted group might apply for set funds for a set purpose.
And Mr. President, maybe a clarification. If the intent is just to keep this as a program with MIAC, I'm supportive of that, if that's how we want to continue. This is a program that's ran for MIAC. These are youth that don't have the ability to vote. Here's a way for them to continue. What we have done as a city was to give opportunity and voice for our young people. That by itself is fantastic. Last year, through the generosity of Republic, we ran a secondary program that didn't use taxpayer dollars with Republic.
Right.
That was a one-time event that presented itself. Great. If that's how we want to continue, I'm supportive of that. If where you're saying we want to change how we do participatory budgeting, that's where I'm saying maybe if that's the intent of the council, then yes, maybe it does become more of a grant and less of a program that is less staff intensive.
That was it just got on the agenda to circle back on the unanswered question from the budget meeting. If there's a desire to expand or to do it different with the funds that were allocated, or continue as we're doing it.
Mr. President, my apologies, one more thing, and I think it's important for council to note is whatever route we're headed, I think that we need to communicate that fairly quickly to Jody or to finance or to whomever. I'm a Kiwanian. I guess we didn't do a very good job with the parade this year, as I learned in this meeting. I'm the one apparently to blame. But I was at our weekly meeting, and a member of the Mayor's Senior Advisory Board was there talking about what they're planning to do for participatory budgeting this year, which piqued my interest. So if we're shifting, if we're changing, we should probably do a good job of communicating that to our past stakeholders who believe we're funding that this year.
I'm not aware of any shift or change, and we can close the loop or not right now, unless if there was a desire to do something different, now's the time. So,
Mr. President?
Yes.
So I think, first of all, we only have the budget for one thing, probably, unless you're planning on taking it and splitting it halfway between the MIAC and the seniors. I'm totally open to how it goes, whether it stays with MIAC, whether it goes to seniors, whether it goes every other year, opening it up to the city and have it be more like a competition, not a grant, not just giving somebody money to do it, but having it still run through the city, but they bring their ideas to the city. And then, participate the same way any of these other groups have done in the past. But we don't have enough in our budget for the seniors and MIAC, and I think that's what Councilman Kavanagh is talking about. So if MIAC thinks that they're doing a project and the seniors think they're doing a project, and we only budgeted for one project, we have to make a decision. Right? We can't just leave it the way it is, because it isn't anything.
Mr. President,
Mr. Palmer?
maybe we should just pick one for this year and let the new council and mayor discuss what to make of its future next year, because regardless of what happens, there's going to be drastically different makeup up here. So we can just pick this year, and rather than setting a plan for them that they
Right.
throw off, let them make the plan next year.
We've allocated funds for next year already, though. After 2020. Do you have something?
Mr. President.
Mr. Roberts?
I was debating here. To me, they almost sound like two different things, because it does sound, if we open it up to everyone, that it is more of a grant type program, that having seen and run several grants can be completely and totally overwhelming if not prepared. And I think it would take more like a year or two to preface that, so that we have staff in place, and that it may not be specifically a grant program, but is run more like a grant program where people or groups apply, and you may end up with 20, 30. In this city of wonderful ideas, we may end up with 100, who knows? But we need to have in place who's going to vet those out, set the parameters. And so I think for this coming year, we need to either leave it with MIAC, split it, or let MIAC and the seniors compete for the dollars and go head to head,
Or work together.
or work together.
That'd be great.
Interesting.
Do you want to chew on this and bring it back? Is there any consensus?
Mr.
I
President?
mean, what we have right now is MIAC and the seniors, we've allocated 20,000. We can pick one of the two, we can do a budget amendment and fund both to utilize it.
Mr. President, my 2 cents, I'm not supportive of appropriating a second set of $20,000 or $40,000 total to do one for seniors and one for MIAC. We've budgeted $20,000 for the past few years for participatory budgeting. I'm fine with leaving it as is, and the programs that are coming out of the mayor's office can bring forth proposals, and we can go from there. I'm also equally fine with leaving it as a MIAC program.
Okay.
Second.
Your ideas?
Mr. President, I'm also supportive of keeping it status quo. I think it's a little bit early to maybe start talking about different avenues, different opportunities. I think that can get a little bit complicated, not something that we're prepared to discuss this evening. So I'd be supportive of keeping it as is, and like Mr. Kavanagh discussed, maybe let the Jody or the mayor's office decide, where it's going to go, MIAC or the seniors. I don't have a preference between the two. I don't care.
Mr. President?
Yes.
Again, I agree, I'm fine with leaving it status quo, but what is status quo? And like Mr. Kavanagh said, we need to let these groups know. And I think that means not waiting until January. If they have, they're gonna get, that just shortens their window. If they're thinking of ideas and then, they're working on stuff for another 4 months, and then we're like, oh yeah, we gave that money to a different group, I don't think that's appropriate either. So
Okay.
I think that a decision should be made, whatever that is, and I'm good with either and or both.
Mr. President,
Go
sorry.
ahead.
I feel like that we are jumping into the weeds of how to manage the mayor's office and that staff, and I'm not comfortable with that. We've appropriated the funds. Leave it to the mayor's office to decide what and how they want to go with it. I think we have provided good context to confuse everyone, as we're very good at. And rather than making it even more confusing, we've appropriated the dollars.
Let them do it.
Mayor's office can decide how they want to use it. Perfect.
I'm fine with that too.
Okay.
I just don't think it should wait till January. That was kind of my,
Mr. President, agree with Councilmember Mylum, is that decision needs to be made sooner rather than later and communicated to MIAC or the seniors or both of them so that people aren't out promoting a
Sure.
program that maybe they're not going to be able to participate in.
And the mayor's office and Jody can help lead that decision and process.
It's most appropriate. Great. Took us a minute to get there. Appreciate it.
Good work, everybody. 6C, that's it. Anything else on the workshop agenda?
nope.
Mr. President, move we adjourn our work session meeting.
Been moved and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, well done.